It was a quiet night, the kind that settled over the city like a held breath. For most people, the glittering skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows would have offered some comfort. But for Adelfredo, comfort was a language he had long since forgotten how to speak. He stood near the glass, a tumbler of untouched whiskey in his hand, watching the city lights flicker far below. Headlights crawled along distant highways. Somewhere down there, ordinary men were driving home to ordinary women who would ask them how their day went. Adelfredo noticed these things tonight in a way he usually did not. Perhaps because, for all the power he commanded, something beneath his ribs felt strangely hollow. Welcome to Roses and Revolvers, where no one leaves untouched. If this story had your heart racing, you already know you can't stop here. Subscribe now, because the next confession? It's darker. And you won't want to hear about it from someone else. Drop your location in the comments. I want to know who's brave enough to stay. To the outside world, the name Adelfredo Moretti meant one thing: silence any room simply by walking into it. He was a man whose word was law in a city that ran on fear and favors. Associates deferred to him, rivals avoided his name, and the police found reasons to look in other directions. He had built this empire with his bare hands, clawing his way up from nothing through sheer will and ruthlessness. People thought they understood him. They did not. There had been a time, years before the empire, when he was simply Adol. A restless young man with calloused hands and a burning need to prove the world wrong. It was during those early years that he met Esther Colombo. She came into his life like the first warm day after a long winter, quiet, unhurried, but impossible to ignore. She had married him when his wardrobe consisted of 2 shirts and a leather jacket. When his business was barely a word people used with respect. She believed in a version of him that he sometimes struggled to see in himself, not the boss, not the enforcer, but the man underneath, the one who still flinched at cruelty and felt the weight of other people's pain. Their early years together had been small in all the ways that matter most. A cramped apartment in the south quarter of the city, meals shared over a second-hand table, late evenings where they would lie awake and talk about a future that felt wide open and possible. Esther never wanted grandeur. She wanted him, present, honest, hers. For a time, that had been enough for both of them. But power changed the geometry of a man's life, often without him noticing. As Adelfredo's reach expanded, so did the distance between him and the world Esther represented. Business dinners replaced family evenings. Bodyguards replaced friends. Secrets replaced honesty, and loyalty became a calculation rather than a feeling. Esther adapted without complaint, retreating quietly into her own life, her own silences. She never demanded more than he could give. She only grieved it, privately, in a way that left no visible marks. It was into this gap that Camilla had stepped. Sleek, ambitious, intoxicating, she moved through his world with the easy confidence of someone who had never been afraid of the things that should be feared. She understood power, or at least knew how to speak its language. She laughed at the right moments, wore the right silences, and made Adelfredo feel, for the first time in years, like the most important man in the room rather than simply the most dangerous one. What he mistook for admiration was, in truth, appetite. But a man who has spent long enough being feared can forget the difference. Now Camilla stood behind him in the cool blue shadow of their shared bedroom, the penthouse he had decorated for her at her suggestion, on the floor above the city that was supposed to belong to him. Her voice, when she spoke, was silk over steel. She had been patient for months. She had laughed at Esther's name, dismissed her as a relic of a smaller life. And tonight, she had asked for the one thing she had been building toward: proof. "Send it," she said softly, her eyes steady on his back. "Tell her it is finished. If she ever meant anything to you, you owe her that much clarity." Adelfredo looked down at the screen of his phone. The message was already typed. Camilla had, with characteristic efficiency, helped him draft it. He read the words once, twice. They were precise. Cold. Final. The kind of sentence that closes a door so completely that even the echo disappears. He pressed send. The notification blinked and vanished. The city continued to breathe below him. Camilla exhaled softly behind him, satisfied. Adelfredo set the phone face down on the window ledge and picked up his whiskey, telling himself it was done. Telling himself this was the rational choice. Telling himself, without quite believing it, that the hollowness in his chest was simply the sensation of moving forward. He did not yet know that the phone would buzz again in less than 60 seconds. He did not yet know that Esther, who had said so little for so long, had found 3 words that would bring the most feared man in the city to his knees. He did not yet know that she had been keeping a secret far heavier than his own, and that his message had been the last weight her heart could carry. He had not always been a man who made women cry. There was a version of Adelfredo Moretti that existed only in old photographs now, younger, leaner, with hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with money. He had clawed his way into power through years of calculated sacrifice, absorbing beatings that would have ended lesser men, outlasting rivals who had every advantage except his particular brand of cold, patient fury. By 35, he controlled 3 districts, 2 judges, and the loyalty of men who would not flinch at a direct order. By 40, his name was a closed door. Nobody knocked unless they had been told they could. He had built all of it with Esther beside him. Not visibly, she was never at the meetings, never in the rooms where things were decided. But she was the reason the rooms existed at all. In the years when the empire was still an ambition rather than a reality, it was Esther who kept the lights on when business dried up, who pressed cold cloths to his knuckles after bad nights, who never once asked him to stop because she understood, somehow, that stopping would have hollowed him out entirely. She gave him stability without demanding it back. She was the ground beneath his feet, and like the ground, he had stopped noticing her. Camilla noticed everything. Every decision, every scar, every controlled silence that meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead. She catalogued him like someone studying a rare, dangerous thing they intended to possess. She told him he was extraordinary in a voice that sounded like she had just discovered it herself. She laughed at his darkness instead of quietly absorbing it. With Esther, he had always felt responsible. With Camilla, he felt invincible, and a man who trades responsibility for invincibility will convince himself the exchange was wisdom. That was the lie he had been living inside for 14 months. He knew it was a lie. That was the part he never let himself finish the thought on. Some truths are so corrosive that men build entire architectures of distraction just to avoid standing near them. His phone buzzed on the ledge. He did not move toward it immediately. Camilla, still draped across the edge of the bed behind him, made a small sound of satisfaction. She thought it was a business alert. She had no idea that Esther, a woman she had dismissed as a footnote, never replied to messages within the first minute. Not once in 17 years of marriage. Esther always took her time, chose her words carefully. Adelfredo turned around slowly and picked up the phone. The screen read one new message. His name in her contact. His thumb hovered. Something cold moved through him, not guilt, not yet. Something older. The particular dread of a man who realizes, 1/2 second too late, that he may have just made the worst mistake of his life. It had started, as Camilla's maneuvers always did, with something that sounded like love. 3 hours earlier, she had been curled against him on the white linen of the bed, her fingers tracing the tattoo across his collarbone, her voice soft and unhurried, the voice she used when she wanted something large. She had been building to this for weeks. Adelfredo had felt it coming the way he felt most things coming, too clearly, too late, and with no immediate desire to stop it. "You keep her on a shelf," Camilla had said. Not accusatory. Almost tender. Like something you're not sure you're done with. And she just waits. Like that's normal. He hadn't answered. Which was, he understood now, the answer she needed. She sat up slowly, letting the silence do its work. "I don't need a grand gesture, Adal. I need to know that when you picture your life in 5 years, I'm actually in it. Not just the nights. The whole thing. Her eyes, when they found his, were steady and depthless. Because I'm not built for almost. It was masterfully done. He could see that now, standing at the window with the sent message already burning in his phone's memory. She had handed him the words, framed the ending, made cruelty feel like clarity. She hadn't screamed or threatened. She had simply made him feel that keeping Esther in his life, even as a ghost, was a kind of cowardice. And Adelfredo Moretti did not do cowardice. She knew exactly which wound to press. He had typed the message himself. Short. Final. The kind of sentence that doesn't invite a response. What he hadn't accounted for, what Camilla, for all her calculation, couldn't have accounted for, was Esther. The phone screen lit up the dark room like a small, cold sun. Camilla laughed softly from the bed. See? Clean. Easy. Adelfredo read the first line of Esther's reply. His blood stopped moving. It was not anger. It was not devastation. It was 3 words written with the quiet certainty of someone who had already made peace with something he didn't yet know had happened. Goodbye, forever. 3 words. No punctuation after the ellipsis. No explanation, no accusation, no final plea dressed up as dignity. Just that, quiet, complete, and utterly without desperation. As if she had been holding the sentence ready for a long time, waiting only to know when to release it. Adelfredo read it twice. Then a third time, the way a man checks a wound he can't quite believe is real. Behind him, Camilla stretched across the bed, reaching for her champagne. Well, she asked, the smile audible in her voice. Radio silence? Tears? She always struck me as a crier. He said nothing. The phone felt suddenly, obscenely heavy in his hand. In 22 years of operating in the most violent underbelly of the city, Adelfredo had received death threats written in other men's blood. He had opened envelopes containing photographs of his own front door. He had sat across tables from men who intended to kill him before the meal ended. None of it, not one single moment of it, had produced this sensation. This specific, vertiginous stillness, as if the floor had dropped 2 inches and the room hadn't caught up yet. Because Esther did not say goodbye. That was the part shattering through him now like glass through silence. In 17 years, through the long absences, the unasked questions, the nights he didn't come home, she had never once said goodbye. She endured. She waited. She folded her grief into neat, quiet shapes and put it away where he wouldn't have to look at it. Goodbye forever was not a woman walking away. It was a woman who already knew she wasn't coming back and had known for some time. Camilla said his name. He barely heard it. His thumb was already moving, pulling up Esther's contact, pressing call. It rang once. Twice. 4 times. 6. Then nothing. Not voicemail. Nothing. As if the line itself had gone somewhere he couldn't follow. A cold fact arrived in his chest without warning or mercy. He did not know where Esther was tonight. He had not known for months. He called her sister first. Rosa picked up on the second ring, and the sound she made when she heard his voice, that single, sharp intake of breath, told him everything before she said a word. Where is she, Rosa? Not a question. Rosa had known him long enough to understand the difference. The pause that followed was the longest 4 seconds of his life. Then, quietly, with a grief that had clearly been carrying itself alone for some time, St. Catherine's. 3rd floor cardiac unit. Adol, she made us promise not to tell you. The room tilted. Cardiac. The word landed like a blade between his ribs, precise and unhurried. He heard Camilla say his name from somewhere behind him. She must have seen his face change, but her voice had become a distant, irrelevant frequency, like a radio left on in an empty room. How long, he said. 7 months. Rosa's voice cracked on the second word. The diagnosis was 7 months ago. She didn't want you distracted. She said, a breath. She said you had enough weight already. 7 months. While he had been in this penthouse, in this bed, convincing himself that Esther was simply the quiet past he was outgrowing, she had been fighting for her life. Alone. In a hospital room she had chosen specifically so he would not have to witness it. She had protected him from her own dying. And tonight, he had sent her a message telling her she was finished. The phone slipped from his hand. He didn't hear it hit the floor. Camilla was standing now, her expression shifting from annoyance to something approaching alarm. Adal, what is? Get out. 2 words. The same quiet register he used when consequences were no longer a discussion. She read it correctly and went still. He was already moving jacket, keys, the door, his mind running one calculation only: how many minutes from the penthouse to St. Catherine's, and whether, after what he had just done, Esther would have any reason left to still be fighting. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent light, and the specific, suffocating quiet of floors where people came to either recover or not. Adelfredo walked through it like a man moving underwater. His name, his face, the 2 bodyguards who had materialized from habit, none of it mattered here. Power had no currency in a cardiac ward at 11 o'clock at night. He was simply a man in a black suit who had arrived too late to something he hadn't known was happening. Rosa was waiting outside room 317. Her eyes were red, her arms crossed, and the look she gave him carried 17 years of things she had never said to his face. She stepped aside without a word. That frightened him more than anything she could have spoken. He pushed the door open. Esther lay against the white pillows with monitors mapping the fragile rhythm of her heart in slow green lines across a screen. She was smaller than he remembered. Not thinner, smaller, the way people become when they have been quietly spending themselves against something enormous and invisible. Her eyes were closed. Her hands, folded at her sides, still wore the ring he had placed there in a registry office 17 years ago when he owned nothing but the nerve to ask her. Adelfredo sat down in the chair beside her bed and said nothing for a long moment. The Empire, the penthouse, the Empire's enemies, Camilla's face, all of it fell away like scaffolding from a building that had never needed it. What remained was this: a man in a plastic chair beside the only person who had ever known him without wanting something from the knowing. He took her hand. Carefully, the way you hold something you have just realized is irreplaceable. Esther. His voice came out wrong, stripped of its authority, bare in a way it hadn't been since he was 23 and had nothing to lose. I'm here. I'm sorry. Her fingers moved. Just slightly. The monitor above her spiked once, then steadied. And then the door opened behind him, and a doctor entered with an expression that made Adelfredo's blood go absolutely cold, the careful, measured face of someone about to deliver information they have been rehearsing. Mr. Moretti, she said quietly. There's something you need to know about last night.